Are we on? Okay. If you want to play that, the audio clip, so we're going from the filler music, the cue music to the number one opening. And I'll begin. And remember, you need to stay on your mic.
Traditional media, I would argue, is systematic mining of the responses to their own.
Let's begin
reports
again, please.
Exist in the
That's not the
blogosphere
beginning of
and
it.
the
If you
web.
can go to iTunes, if you can click.
That would make their own products more valuable commercially and more valuable civically. At least that's what I would suggest we think about.
Sophia, can you click it again? Sorry about this, everyone. It's the number one opening.
systematic mining and most of forms of dominant media. So despite the explosion of all these new alternatives, the mainstream media, the traditional maybe 15, and I'm talking nationally, but I suspect it's pretty similar in terms of dominant media in local markets, they're the essential gatekeepers, the sources of mediated information that certify agendas, largely determine which candidates are viable, which issues are on the agenda. And most of what you see in the rest of all the new media is amplification, commentary on what was originally created by the traditional media. What's ironically missing from the traditional media, I would argue, is systematic mining of the responses to their own reports that exist in the blogosphere and on the web. That would make their own products more valuable commercially and more valuable civically. At least that's what I would suggest we think about.
That was Robert Entman, author of Democracy Without Citizens. Entman is concerned with how corporate news media does not fulfill the needs of a democracy and its population. And we'll be returning to Entman later in the program. Welcome, everyone. This is the 11th Annual CUNY League of Active Speech Professionals Conference. In that long name, we call it CLASP. And this will be the first time CLASP has had such a conference linked to a live radio broadcast. I want to welcome CLASP President Patricia Sokalski of LaGuardia Community College, and the first president and co-founder of CLASP, Dr. Shauna Vey of the New York City College of Technology. This evening's panel will be investigating the following question. How have mass media changed public speech and influenced the quality of American democracy? Further, how has digital communication changed our students' worldview, their ways of forming thoughts publicly, and sharing those ideas and opinions in and out of the classroom? Further, how has corporate-controlled news and entertainment media influenced our students' attitudes about American democracy? Now, we'll get to some of those questions, and maybe we'll kind of leak into other kinds of questions dealing with media and democracy and public speech. But I think we need to recognize that we inhabit a new world. For the academics sitting around me here at this table, these changes in the dynamic between mass media and public speech and democracy, it may be evident. It's stuff we study and read all the time. Our students, though, are living through these changes. They swim in mediated waters and are acclimated to the temperature and may not notice it as the waters are heating up. Can our observations of this new super-mediated, superheated world lead to classroom experiences that open new ways for our students and their teachers to understand themselves and the world that our students are inheriting? What are we giving them? So let's get started. It's April 21st, 2015. We're broadcasting over radio568.com here at John Jay College, here in the Black Box Theater in the new building of the John Jay School. Tonight's panelists are faculty in CUNY in communication and media studies and English. And we're hoping for a live audience, but we don't have much of a live audience here. So we're just going to continue here without an audience. We do have here with us Sophia Canfield, who is running the board for us, and I thank her for doing that. For those of you listening on your mediated paraphernalia, if you have a question or comments, please tweet us at Radio568JJ. So I'd like to introduce the panel. First off, let me introduce Dr. Lyle Davies. He teaches here at John Jay in the media studies. Well, we don't have a media studies minor. Maybe we do someday. But in the English department. He's a documentary filmmaker and involved in participatory media justice projects engaging New York City youth, the homeless, and immigrant workers. He has recently published one of his articles on Undercover Boss and is publishing something else. We'll get to that other thing that he's publishing in a second. Welcome, Lyle.
Thank you.
And Dr. Jane Cleland from Lehman College in the English department. She's director of the new program for professional communications. She is a nonfiction author. One of the things she wrote, Writing for Results, came out of McGraw-Hill. She also writes for the Josie Prescott Antiques Mystery Series, short stories, and noir plays. is a host of the Writers' Room, a radio show which I haven't listened to, but I'm going to, I promise. It sounds very interesting. I saw it on the web. Welcome. Welcome, Jane.
Thank you so much.
And we have Dr. Martin Wallenstein, also a faculty here at John Jay in the Communication Theater Arts Department, previously acting dean of undergraduate studies. A while ago, the acting chief librarian, I guess that was a while ago.
Yes.
Chaired the Department of Speech and Theater and Media and chaired IRB here at John Jay. Published articles of communication on felony legal briefs he's published. And he's be heading off to a conference at ECA as soon as this broadcast is over. He's going to take his bags and leave for Pittsburgh? Where is it?
Philadelphia.
Philadelphia. I knew it was something to start with a P. Thank you. Welcome, Martin. And
Thank you, Alan.
yes, and Dr. Judith Kahn is here, and she is a new entrant here at John Jay, and is the director of John Jay Online. And maybe we'll hear more about the work that she is doing as John Jay moves towards more online offerings. She had been the director of e-learning and distance learning at Yeshiva University and developed online programs at other distinguished institutions, and has presented and published on educational technology and educational psychology. And I welcome Judy to the panel.
Thank you.
Yes. To recap, this evening's conversation will focus on the ways that public speech in our mediated world influences American democracy and its citizens, and anything else that anyone on the panel wants to talk about. We'll be divided into three segments. First, we'll kind of take a big picture look at media and its relationship to democracy and public speech. Then we'll kind of look more at particularly looking at hate speech and its effect, hopefully, on a developing democracy and whether and how it helps or hinders that. And finally, we're going to look at how these influences affect public speech training in our colleges, specifically here at CUNY, and ask the question, is it possible to have a totally online public speech class? I think some people would say, nah, that's not possible. But I think it is. I think it's totally possible. So let's begin with a kind of a quick big look at democratic communication and mass media. And I wanted to first consider net neutrality. And we're going to turn to Lyle in a second, Professor Davies. It seems that equal access to the internet may be the single most important linchpin of a successful democracy today. That depends on equal access to opportunities of business in invention and civic understanding. If corporate interest overtakes citizen interest, it seems to me, the question is, can a freely developing democracy really exist? So I'd like to reintroduce my colleague in media studies in the English department, Dr. Lyle Davies. You have an article coming up that's going to be published soon in a edited book. The title you gave me was Netflix and the Struggle for an Open Internet.
Yeah, that's correct, Alan.
Yes. So I'd like to begin this discussion with a little clip. So Sophia, get ready. This is from the January 2014 On the Media program, in which Brooke Gladstone asks Siva Vaidyanathan, Chair of Media Studies at the University of Virginia and author of The Googleization of Everything and Why We Should Worry. Here he defines net neutrality.
And it's really not so much about charging rates to you and me, the users. It's more about charging extortion rates or payola to the providers of the content. That's kind of the information ecosystem we're used to for the past 200 years. We had a brief moment, the past 20 years, when it seemed like we might actually create a level playing field where someone's expressions and ideas could win the day over a tremendous amount of capital. But in the absence of network neutrality, we're going to be reverting back to that system in which there really are going to be very few avenues for insurgents, and incumbents will dominate just about every outlet for expression.
Incumbents dominating. Those that are in power remain in power. So what about that?
Well, first of all, that's a lovely clip that makes complete sense to me, but one of the problems we have talking about this is the difficulties of explaining to people what really the issue is. First of all, I prefer the term open internet rather than net neutrality. It is a little more friendly. Some people use the term internet freedom because that even suggests perhaps a more favorable, a more affirmative principle of freedom in communication. Everything that was just said, I think, is viable and useful, particularly the expression that this has been perhaps a 20-year window, which may go away. And as you know from your work on radio broadcasting in the 1920s, there was a window then when pretty much anyone could start a radio station. A very brief period between the very early 1920s and 1927, 1928, where every union, well, not every union, but many unions, church organizations, all kinds of people got into broadcasting, and then were regulated out of the business by the FCC, first the Radio Commission, then the Federal Communications Commission, which sort of regulated in favor of the corporate interests. They saw the public interest and the large companies as being synergistic. And we potentially have the same problem right now. We could look back 80 years from now and say, well, there was a very strange period at the beginning years of the internet when anyone could sort of do anything and not pay to have to do it. But it could go away. It's unlikely that's going to happen, partly because people have got so attached to it, but also it doesn't have some of the conditions that radio broadcasting had. The early radio stations were all interfering with each other. We don't have that on the internet. But yes, it's important to say that the internet is kind of an anomaly among mass communications, is that it is very unlike cable television. It is very unlike broadcast television. It's much more like a telephone system, and there are policy and legal reasons why it's like a telephone system as opposed to cable television, for example. And in effect, I think we want to preserve that as a forum for all kinds of speech. Because the wonderful thing about telephones is when you place a call, nobody interferes with that call, and the internet mirrors that, completely anonymous, completely different to most of the mass communication forms that we have. In terms of defining net neutrality, I think there's a simpler way than your introductory roll-in does, and to use Tim Wu's model. Tim Wu, a fascinating legal scholar of the internet who ran for lieutenant governor in New York State, among other things, a fascinating individual, who says really it's about two constituents. It's about edge providers, the people who make stuff for the internet, being allowed to make whatever they want and let the public sort out whether they want that stuff, and users having the power to select from whatever they want and let them figure out what they want the internet to be, which is a completely different model to the corporate model, which is putting it in the hands of broadband internet service providers, the ISPs, and letting them determine the content. So net neutrality is about preserving the freedoms at both ends, both edges of the internet, the users being able to access whatever they want and people being able to put whatever they want onto it, as opposed to the conduit controlling it, which is what Comcast and the big ISPs would prefer. They'd like to generate revenue from that in-between stage.
So I mean, we can open this up to the panel at this point. I think we've got a good start on this discussion of net neutrality. So what would our voices really be censored if Comcast did what it wanted to do? I mean, what would happen if Comcast actually did have a different pricing for Netflix and whatever? I mean, Netflix is not free speech, is it?
There's some twists and turns to the Netflix case because it technically, in some ways, is not a net neutrality case. It's to do with the interconnect. It's to do with the way Netflix connects to the networks operated by the ISPs. What Tim Wu said on this, I think, is good. He said that this is water in the basement. This is the beginning of a trend which, there's a number of FCC commissioners who will say there is no issue here. Net neutrality is irrelevant because we already have net neutrality. It's not entirely true. There has been interference with content on the internet by ISPs. But where it leads to is really the question. And the introduction of fees to get your content onto the networks operated by broadband ISPs is perhaps the beginning, the water in the basement of other kinds of fees. And
so you're seeing, even though the FCC seems to be, yes, Martin, you wanted to go right ahead. Yeah.
I was just wondering if there's another danger to open access, the danger of not being heard. Just today I went online using one of the popular search engines and put in JJAY College. And it took me about a page of advertised other sites before I got to actually look at JJAY College. There was a story earlier today about how Google was changing their criteria for how they were ranking different businesses, and they were going to look at how friendly you were to cell phones. And there were people expressing concern that if they were knocked out of their spot, they were going to lose their business. So, is there a danger of our losing that access through through commercial criteria that the websites or that the popular search engines are developing?
There are algorithm issues in this as well. I mean, we sort of have de facto net neutrality. I mean, data travels at roughly the same speed, no matter where it's going in its source. But that doesn't mean it's a level playing field in other ways. One of the sort of dirty secrets of the internet is there's much more ability to move data from centralized locations to the periphery than the other way around. It's much easier to move data from Netflix, for example, than it is for end users to generate lots and lots of content and feed it back into the system. The system is set up to prioritize a flow in one direction. In terms of your question, net neutrality really doesn't have anything to do with whether you're going to still have lots of pop-up windows advertising things, whether you're going to have algorithms which favor one kind of website over another. But it does mean that with an open internet, with net neutrality, that your content is going to be there somewhere. And once you seek to access it, if you can come up with a better search criteria, you can access it equally. The internet I said earlier, it's sort of remarkable in how different it is to things like cable television, but it's certainly not perfect. And, I got involved in this 20 years ago or so, talking with friends who were convinced that there would never be advertising on the internet. They saw television as an evil, and they thought the internet was going to be something different. It was tremendous idealism, it still is, a problem with sort of techno-utopianism. But 20 years ago, there were people who really believed this was going to be some radical alternative. And look at it; it's clogged with nonsense in so many ways.
The situation is dire, but is it really that dire? This is radio568.com, and you can contact us at radio568JJ on your Twitter account. Lyle, you just said that there's generally a flow in a certain direction, but there are other flows that are going on the internet, and I thought maybe we could expand this out to a discussion of what's going on in journalism and media news. Certainly media news and net neutrality, all of this is connected. But another concern for free and open democracy, does involve the fourth estate. And Jay Rosen, who is big on the public, citizen journalism for many years, in a segment in TED Talks, Rosen describes how a certain kind of open source journalism via the daily costs, which you may know or may not know about, the kind of liberal socialist view of the news, defeated a well-funded, through this kind of open source, people getting together using the internet to make a change, and they defeated a well-funded political machine, and we have a clip on that.
In 2004, this crazed media company called Sinclair Broadcasting decided that they were going to air an anti-Kerry documentary 3 weeks before the election. And the Daily Kos community, which at that time was large and getting larger, decided nobody knew who Sinclair was. And almost overnight was able to organize itself to create an online dossier explaining who Sinclair was and who ran this company and what their values were. And it happened like in a matter of days. And this resource was better at explaining Sinclair and where Sinclair was coming from than anything that was in the press at the time. And they didn't have instructions. They hadn't read the Halloween documents or this article in Salon. They just knew how to do it. And part of the reason that they could do it was they were an already organized online community. And they didn't have to pay the costs of organizing themselves because There were already people who believed in the values of daily cost and knew they were Democrats. And furthermore, they were motivated not only by their outrage at Sinclair Broadcasting, but by the fact that they knew the election was 3 weeks away and that this could have an effect. And in organizing these open source projects, one of the first things you have to figure out is what would motivate people to participate. So in this early example, the election and the nearness of the balloting motivated them because they felt they could lose and Sinclair could unfairly win.
So here we have a movement in the other direction, and I mean there are people writing about the fact that the public does have a certain chance with the internet they didn't have before of pushing forward their message in ways that journalists and professionals just can't do it or won't do it.
You've had a dramatic change in the way news is generated and the way it's broadcast. And for example, if you contrast what happened when Daniel Ellsberg back in the 70s released the Pentagon Papers, he had to photostat this stuff, send it off to various media, where the editors would then decide whether or not they were going to broadcast it. Contrast that with WikiLeaks, where people just fire this stuff online, and it shows up the same day.
Well, it's the same minute as well. I mean, there's a lot of crowdsourcing and civilian reporters, and that are impacting the entire political stage, and that's happening globally.
This raises some other issues about free press, because many states have passed reporter shield laws. Well, is someone who reports for the John Jay Radio a reporter? If someone who goes online with a blog, are they a reporter? In some states they're saying yes, in others they might say no. But it's raised some interesting questions about who's going to benefit from that reporter shield.
I think the other question we need to ask is who has the authority to present this information? If you have WikiLeaks presenting information that has security problems that are embedded in it, is it appropriate to give it over to the so-called professionals, to the journalists, to the experts who are able to, and I'm just putting quotes around all this, who are able to kind of discern what is appropriate to put out onto the internet, onto media news? Or is it appropriate to give it to the citizen journalist to say, no, we're going to put this out, and everyone needs to know it?
Well, the question is who's defining authority here?
Right.
I mean, who's responsible for it? And if you're talking in a democracy, I mean, the people are responsible for it.
Mm.
There was a time when television faced the same issue, and I saw an interview with a venerable reporter who talked about how his editor told him, no, this story is too big for television. We have to pass it on to a newspaper. That certainly would never happen today. And it's an issue. And one of the things that reporters ought to know is that, particularly in the area of whistleblowing, the federal government has no reporter shield law, and they will go after the reporter for their sources as well as the person who originally did the leak. So
yeah,
you're facing some hazards if you do this.
Right, right. Let me just kind of tweak a little discussion a little bit here, and get back to our students. I mean, we have two sides of this issue. We have those the blogosphere out there in which they're engaged and they're putting out their public speech and they're saying something, and then we've got a lot of our students who are just not that interested. And I'd like to play a piece here about that from Robert Entman. If we can play that now.
I realize it's not necessarily clear that audiences are, in fact, demanding. We do want to separate the facts from the noise. Maybe more audience members want the noise. Maybe they don't really want to understand issues like climate change because it's terribly depressing. My class constantly looks glummer and glummer as the year and as the hour goes on. And I feel slightly guilty about it. But on the other hand, I mean, I feel like that does kind of lead to good citizenship. the continuing need as a democracy for some common forums where there actually is a place that all those fragmented people who are constantly tweeting and looking at the Daily Beast and Global Post and USA Today and all those things are actually coming together to find out perhaps what other people think, and also are getting deeper context. And I would, not only do I think this is an important thing for politics, but it remains true, and I think that is somewhat obscured by that there's still a function for these mass media. So despite the explosion of all these new alternatives, the mainstream media, the traditional maybe 15, and I'm talking nationally, but I suspect it's pretty similar in terms of dominant media in local markets, they're the essential gatekeepers, the sources of mediated information that certify agendas, largely determine which candidates are viable, which issues are on the agenda, and most of what you see in the rest of all the new media is amplification, commentary on what was originally created by the traditional media. What's ironically missing from the traditional media, I would argue, is systematic mining of the responses to their own reports that exist in the blogosphere and on the web. That would make their own products more valuable commercially and more valuable civically. At least that's what I would suggest we think about.
So the professionals need to turn to the blog in order to find out what's going on. It seems like that's going on a lot in the press.
See, I don't entirely agree with the comments made, and this idea that it's I think for a certain kind of news, the blogosphere becomes an echo chamber. But, you know, one of the constituents that's been very active around internet, open internet issues is really driven by media justice, is driven by the idea that for the first time, there are sections of society that for the first time have access to communication tools, low-income minorities, LGBTQ communities and so on, who are generating kinds of content which are never seen in the mainstream media. And there's been tremendous activism at grassroots level. You know, recent cases involving police shootings, for example, where grassroots communities have done research, have brought statistics together, have collaborated with other communities to report in all kinds of ways, generating information which is actually setting the agenda for mainstream media news. So I think there's truth to that in a general sense. In an awful lot of the blogs you do find, you know, relinking to existing news stories, but it's certainly not the whole case. And I would really, you know, you look at an organization like the Center for Media Justice, which does a lot of grassroots organizing around bringing media tools into precisely the kinds of communities I've described. Very, very exciting opportunities for grassroots reporting, grassroots digital storytelling, taking on issues like the prison phone issue, which was something that came up with the FCC recently. Tremendous injustice, the cost of phone calls going in and out of prisons. Nothing was done about it for decades. The FCC didn't move for over a decade. Grassroots organizing on that issue transformed that, driven by a very small number of grassroots media organizations. Working Narrative, Center for Media Justice, a group called Magnet, transformed the agenda. And the FCC actually took action on that, I think, last year. So I think there's a different narrative that can be told about this.
There absolutely is. There's many, many different narratives, but we tend to be getting this one narrative that seems to be overshadowing all the rest.
I disagree with the speaker for a different reason, because
this is Entman.
Yeah,
Robert Entman.
Yeah,
okay.
and it's because when it comes to political campaigns, things are going in the other direction, where big money is creating an awful lot of noise that drowns out things that are happening on the web. In the last presidential election, $6 billion were spent. There's going to be more spent on this one, and people are predicting that more of it is going to be spent by PACs that are less politically responsible and more anonymous than it's going to be spent by the actual campaigns. We have a Supreme Court that said that spending money equals speech. And I think people at this panel recognize that's just not true. Spending money can enable speech, but if you spend enough, you can also drown out speech. And that's a very serious problem that we're facing now in our political process.
Yep. I'm going to close this segment and keep the things moving. And we'll take a brief break now, and then we're going to address the topic of hate speech in a mediated world. So just about a minute, and we'll be right back.
Mein Kampf, the cornerstone argument for the Third Reich, is a cut-and-dried example of hate speech. But no matter how vile, how irredeemable, it is published here in the United States. Jeremy Waldron, author of The Harm in Hate Speech, might ask why. And you might answer, because of the First Amendment of the Constitution. But Waldron believes that the First Amendment doesn't and shouldn't protect the most extreme forms of hate speech. And he asks you to consider an anecdote. A father and his 2 children are walking in their American town shortly after September 11th. The family is Muslim, and they encounter some particularly virulent and public invective aimed directly at them.
And he looks at them, he tries to shield them from it. He knows what it means. It means that they are not going to be welcome, or that somebody is trying to persuade others to not make them welcome. We have to understand this matter intelligently, and that does mean looking at it not just through my eyes as a white liberal who say, well, I can take this, I can handle this, but through the eyes of people who have to live their lives, do their business, raise their children in an atmosphere that is poisoned by this sort of abuse.
So, welcome back to this program of CLASP, a conference and broadcast. We're now going to be talking briefly about the impact of hate speech on democracy and how we develop as a free and free speech kind of country. And in this soundbite, Brooke Gladstone of On the Media questioned law professor Jeremy Waldron's argument that there must be a limit to hate speech. But the question that she asks is, isn't the protection of hate-filled speech a cornerstone of the American democracy? Or, in fact, does such speech erode discourse and lead to less freedom? Certainly here at JJAY College, we're not allowed to have any hate speech. It's not condoned at all, although it has happened. So, Martin, you're developing a course here at JJAY that deals with this topic, and I wondered, what is your take on this issue of hate speech? Take it or leave it.
Well, first let me talk about the controversy that your tape revealed. The traditional view is the remedy for hate speech is more speech, good speech. That if in the clash of ideas, that the good ideas will win out. If we look at what's happened in Europe and other parts of the world, that hasn't necessarily been the case. We've been fairly fortunate in the United States, where for the most part that has been the case, but increasingly international scholars and some U.S. scholars have been questioning that rubric. If you look at Anthony Lewis's freedom of thought, freedom for the thought that we hate, A Brief Biography of the First Amendment, he takes that view, that the remedy for bad speech is more speech. Waldron wrote a book, The Harm in Hate Speech, which was just quoted, and takes the opposite point of view. It's really a refutation of the Anthony Lewis position. One of the problems with legislating against hate speech is that often you end up with regulations that work against minorities as opposed to for their benefit. When the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s was being formulated, they made a strategic decision not to advocate for opposition to hate speech because they were afraid that that was going to be turned against them in their quest for civil rights. But there's no question hate speech has certainly been making headlines lately in this country. The whole nation saw the racist chant of the fraternity members in Oklahoma and the events in Ferguson. There was a debate in the California system, university system, where a young lady who was an honors student wanted to be on the judicial board, and they initially voted against her because she was Jewish. There was an issue for another student who was running in the California system, who was running for student government, and the issue was brought up, well, she's Jewish, so what about her feelings for Israel? That wouldn't have been brought out about anybody else. We have issues with Quran burning. We have issues with anti-gay, anti-lesbian, anti-women, even anti-white male. We have a lot of issues with hate speech. Even right here in CUNY, there was one campus where there were swastikas, not just in the bathroom walls, but also in the walls of the student government office. And there was other homophobic and racist graffiti found. So it's a big issue nationally, and it's an issue here. This is one of the reasons that I've developed the course that I did on hate speech, because and when you talk about what happens online, it becomes even worse and even more virulent. There's a ton of law review articles that looks at this. First of all, who has jurisdiction when something's online? Is it one of the countries that does have laws against hate speech, or is it the United States? Then you have the problem of anonymity. Who says it? Who's responsible? Is the site that allows it responsible? So there are a lot of big issues there. But the point that I'd like to make is that speech instructors are really uniquely qualified to deal with this kind of issue, because we deal with it all the time. If you've taught more than one semester in speech, you've probably had more than one speech with prejudice and hate in it. And I remember, and we're used to diffusing that, we're used to talking about it, we're used to confronting those issues. I remember a student coming up to me and saying, we shouldn't be talking about race because it's too sensitive. And my response was, we need to be talking about it because it's too sensitive. And every speech text worth its salt talks about xenophobia, has a chapter on cross-cultural communication. This is something that we're comfortable dealing with, and in a multicultural place like City University, and particularly at JJAY College where I teach, where there's no majority group, I think it's very important to talk about these issues, to talk about collegiality, and to talk about standing up and whether or not we're going to have legislation. When hate speech is there, we need to stand against it.
Well, go on, Judy.
There are a couple of thoughts that I had from listening to the recording. They refer to it as abuse. And the question that I ask is, when does it become abuse? If somebody is voicing their opinion or their prejudice, I think there's a continuum as far as when it becomes abuse, and where is that balance of responsibility? And the other thought that I wanted to address, and that's very important when you talked about anonymity, is cyberbullying. You're talking about hate speech, but we're talking about the cyberbullying and the impact on individuals that are very, very threatening. So again, where does the responsibility lie?
Well, legally, I can tell you that it's in a way a little bit ambiguous. There's a very old case. It goes back to World War II. the Chaplinsky case, Chaplinsky versus New Hampshire, where they said, where someone was called a Nazi, and what the court said is, no, that's not protected speech, that's fighting words. But it's hard to find a case since then where the court has said, no, this is fighting words, it's not protected. If you're attacked as an individual, you have rights to go after that. But the court has ruled that there's no such thing as group libel, at least not in this country. There are other countries where that's not true. There are laws against anti-Semitism, there are laws against racist speech, there are laws in Germany and other places against Holocaust denial. We don't have that here. There are places where they would say, if you burn a Koran, that's blasphemous, and you can be prosecuted for that you can be prosecuted for blasphemy. The problem with that, and the argument that the more speech people would make is, wait a minute, there's not, if you look at any religion, it's blasphemous against some other religion. And if you look at atheists, they're blasphemous against all religions. So where are we going to draw the line?
But I also have another question that goes back earlier to our discussion about the internet, and that is, what is the responsibility of the online sites, like Facebook, for example, when this happens online? Should they have responsibility? And we talked about that net neutrality before and all of that, so where is that balance?
You seem to be directing that to me, and I don't have the answer. I don't think anyone has that answer. I think Facebook, for example, has a set of policies that try and maintain what they view as certain standards, including certain legal standards. And we don't necessarily agree with the way they draw the line. Sometimes they take photographs down that they shouldn't be taking down. Ultimately, probably the answer is that the internet, even a net neutral internet, is still prohibited from communicating illegal content. Whether that's malware software which is designed to do harm to the network, or whether it's something like child pornography. I mean, a net neutrality system does not mean that it's completely ruleless. We have another internet which is completely ruleless, the dark one. I mean, these questions seem to have migrated from the interface, the human face-to-face contact, into a different arena, and I'm not sure that, I mean, there are some new twists and turns in it, but the fundamental principles are perhaps not that different.
Well, an example of that is a good speaker can persuade you to anything, whether it's true or not. Just as this free speech idea on the internet, you can put up anything you want, and if it's well designed and well written, it has some credibility that it may not deserve.
But, you know, that issue of anonymity is so critical, because there's something called the disinhibition effect. I mean, people feel very comfortable, they're anonymous, that they can put anything on there. And I think, you know, the question that I have, does that foster more hate speech or more opportunity for these kinds of questionable speeches online?
I don't think there's any question that it does.
But one of the questions ought to be, are we creating a threatening environment for someone? And the courts recognize that if you have an imminent threat, that's something. If you're creating an imminent threat, that's something you cannot do. Well, in the online age, it seems a lot easier to create an imminent threat, and you can do it not just at the soapbox where you're creating your speech, but you can post something online that creates an imminent threat in a distant place.
Let's look at an example.
Right, and digitally, I'm sorry, with the smartphones, I mean, it goes global.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and it's repeatable, and it's there always, and it's constantly hurting, and there's all that. I wonder if we can kind of quickly analyze. There was an incident that happened here at John Jay in which a peaceful, very friendly get-together of the various clubs, including the Hillel Club and the Free Palestine Club, were involved. And at one point, the Free Palestine Club came out and laid down on the floor, I hear, and they were like all blood. They looked like they were all bloody and was protesting Israeli takeover of Palestinian lands. And it was a big uproar. It was around for a couple of weeks, and then it was gone. This was done not online, but it was done face to face. It was done in the new building here. What if that had happened online?
My suspicion is that if there was someone with a cell phone there, it's now online.
Right.
But
no, I mean there is an online presence of it.
What First Amendment folks would say is that this is the epitome of what's protected under the First Amendment. This is political speech, and if you don't like what they're saying, then the remedy is just what Judy said: more speech. You have to counter it.
Yep. I think the problem, and I think Waldron gets to it, although he says he has the answer, but obviously he didn't say what the answer was, and maybe I should take your course to find out, is this is a slippery slope. There is a point at which something becomes hate speech and becomes an awful situation for the individual. But also, I should be able to say what I feel. I mean, this is a free country, supposedly, in which speech is, people say what they want to say. Lyle, you wanted to?
I think there's a danger because these things are unified a little bit by the internet of beginning to equate them in ways that they don't deserve to be equated. I mean, cyberbullying is a dramatically different instance than the Palestine case that was just remarked on. If these different forms of speech took place in a public arena, we wouldn't in any way sandwich them together, but we tend to, in discussions of the internet, particularly our generation, who perhaps are not as, who see it in a monolithic way that perhaps another generation doesn't. But the treatment should be dramatically different because they're dramatically different instances. Cyberbullying is really an instance where somebody is deliberately targeted, probably by someone they know within a social network of people who are familiar to them. And that's an entirely different kind of condition, and I think the solution is entirely different.
Yeah.
But the two can come together. There was an article in the Times just a couple of weeks ago about a professor who's giving a lecture, and one of her students came up to her and said, "You should see this. Someone was going on to an anonymous website saying nasty things about her sexuality." Now, this is a combination of cyberbullying and hate speech. The two really were coming together. And it has all the problems that Judy talked about because it is anonymous. And the professor tried to find out who the student was, couldn't. Tried to get the university to do something about it, they wouldn't.
I'm going to move us along unless someone has something dire that they have to say about this. And I'd like to come back to the question of hate speech in the classroom, but not right now. What I'd like to first address is the idea that as we move towards more and more online learning, online teaching, online facilitating of students, for whatever reason we're doing that. One reason we may be doing that and getting online with our education is that online is different, and in some ways it does education better in some ways. And I wanted to play this clip that deals with the possibility of computers and digital ways of approaching that may be a different way of education. So let's play that clip now. Actually, we've got some music in here. We changed the order, and this clip will be coming up in just a second.
I used to teach people how to write computer programs in New Delhi 14 years ago. And right next to where I used to work, there was a slum. And I used to think, how on earth are those kids ever going to learn to write computer programs, or should they not? At the same time, we also had lots of parents, rich people, who had computers, and who used to tell me, you know, my son, I think he's gifted, because, you know, he does wonderful things with computers. And my daughter, oh, surely she's, you know, extra intelligent, and so on. So I suddenly figured that how come all the rich people are having these extraordinarily gifted children? What did the poor do wrong? I made a hole in the boundary wall of the slum next to my office, and I stuck a computer inside it just to see what would happen if I gave a computer to children who never would have one, didn't know any English, didn't know what the internet was. The children came running in. It was 3 feet off the ground, and they said, "What is this?" And I said, "Yeah, but it's, you know, I don't know." So they said, "Why have you put it there?" I said, "Just like that." And they said, "Can we touch it?" I said, "If you wish to." And I went away. About 8 hours later, we found them browsing and teaching each other how to browse. So I said, "But that's impossible, because, you know, how is it possible? They don't know anything." My colleagues said, "No, it's a simple solution. One of your students must have been passing by, showed them how to use the mouse." So I said, "Yeah, that's possible." So I repeated the experiment. I went 300 miles out of Delhi into a really remote village where the chances of a passing software development engineer was very little. I repeated the experiment there. There was no place to stay, so I stuck my computer in, I went away, came back after a couple of months, found kids playing games on it. When they saw me, they said, "We want a faster processor and a better mouse." So I said, "How on earth do you know all this?" And they said something very interesting to me. In an irritated voice, they said, "You've given us a machine that works only in English, so we had to teach ourselves English in order to use it." That's the first time as a teacher that I heard the word "teach ourselves" said so casually.
So I'm going to turn to Jane now. You are developing online courses in the public speaking arena. Do you find that you have this activity going on in which students are teaching themselves, in which they're bringing in stuff that you never thought that they would, and doing things in ways that you didn't think it could be done? Is that happening?
Yes, it is actually. I'm the director of the Program for Professional Communications, an interdisciplinary minor that's just been approved at Lehman College. And many of the courses are all online. They all have a component of public speaking. Speaking in person is different from speaking to a camera or to a microphone. And students in today's increasingly complex business environment have to excel at all three. As an example, a management consulting company I've worked with looks beyond the technical skills. That's of course, what they want to hire. But then they look for excellent communication skills. And an example of why is these accounting professionals meet with clients, but they also conduct meetings via the web, video conferencing, teleconferencing. And when they get assigned to a team, they are to provide two photos, one a professional photo and another of them showcasing some leisure activity. It might be on a tennis court holding a tennis racket, it might be in dive gear bobbing in the ocean, that sort of thing. Each project has its own unique website, and if a client goes there, they'll find the team members, and the photograph that first shows is the professional one. And when you roll your mouse over it, the leisure activity one appears, and you do a little click, and you get an audio presentation of professional intentions and attitudes and approaches, and then you get why I like this hobby. That's a complex skill set for an accountant to have to be good at. And we believe in the English department and in the Arts and Humanities division that it is our responsibility to equip them with a skill set. I want to give you a particular example of an assignment I do, but I want to make the point, to your point, Alan, that they have to teach themselves the technology. I teach them the communication skills and the approaches that will make for a successful presentation, but it is up to them to learn to use it. I give them some guidance, but it's up to them. I've integrated a series of assignments into all classes called Digital Stories. My goal is to prepare students for public speaking using new media. These assignments help students understand the importance of making choices. Each of us has the power to control how we present ourselves to the world. In addition, the assignments help build community in an online world. To prepare a digital story, students select a photograph, script an explanation, which has to be submitted separately because I want to make sure it is actually scripted, not done ad hoc, and record it. One of the most successful examples of a digital story it's called Significant Object. Here's the assignment. Select the most significant object in your house. Say why. My student, Jeanette Geralt, has kindly given me permission to use her story as an example. The object Jeanette chose was a set of index cards, 2 index cards, titled, The more of life you master, the less of life you fear. The more of life you master, the less of life you fear. The index cards are filled with words of encouragement. Here's Jeanette's story.
I live my whole life governed by fear, and I hate it. I bet you're probably wondering, well, if you hate it so much, then don't allow it to rule you. My response to that is, it's easier said than done. I wish I could snap my fingers and always feel confident, ready to take on whatever challenges life brings my way. But the truth is, I have good days and bad. Now don't get me wrong, I have no intention of giving up and giving in to these negative feelings. It's quite the opposite, in fact. I struggle every day to build myself up because I know I'm worth the effort. But I won't lie, sometimes it is exhausting. On days when I feel most defeated, I like to look at the words typed out on these 2 index cards. I've had these cards for quite some time now, as you can tell by the yellowing of the paper. The index cards were given to me by a dear friend. He typed up these words and gave them to me to help remind me that with inner growth, it is possible to shrink fear. And so I read these words and I let them seep in, and I tell myself that it won't always be this difficult. But I sometimes wonder if it will ever be possible to shrink fear enough to make it disappear. I guess the only way I'll find out is by continuing on my journey of inner growth. Wish me luck.
That's Jeanette's beautiful story. And think about it from an online class point of view. Now her classmates know this about her. She has created an intimate connection through a presentation. What I try to teach my students is that the media might change, but the power of the spoken word never does.
So it is possible to create a viable, active, online public speaking class. You talk to a lot of public speaking teachers who've been teaching for a while. They say, what?
You know, it's funny. The second part of this assignment is that you have to watch your classmates' presentations and comment on them. I actually divide them into groups of 7, 8, or 9 so that you're not having to watch 20 or 30 presentations. And the comment can't just be, oh, that was great, or oh, you touched my heart, or you have to move it along. And because we do so much research, in this one, for example, one student researched strategies for overcoming fear, managing anxiety, that sort of thing, and did another presentation. And it becomes a conversation.
Do you think this experience, this online public speaking experience, certainly we could talk a lot about the different varieties of online speech that our students are involved with. I mean, not just in the classroom, because they're involved with all kinds of speech online, you know, social speech mainly. Does it translate into face-to-face speaking?
Yes, I think it does. I think anytime you have to script a presentation and rehearse it for timing, because there are timing limitations that I enforce, you are practicing, you're seeing cadence and rhythm, and you're getting used to how it feels to speak. And I think there's a direct translation.
I would tend to agree. I've done this, and I found that students that put their speeches on video or they record it, they want to get it right because it's out there, it'll be heard, it presents them, it represents them. And they say, I've never worked and rehearsed this so many times. My parents said, what are you doing? We've heard this 20 times already. It's, well, it's not right yet. I got to get it right. Judy.
Yes.
Our new online guru.
Yes, I'm smiling from ear to ear. Our audience can't see, but I'm smiling from ear to ear. I think that you designed a wonderful online class.
Oh, thank you.
One of the, you know, I've used that hole-in-the-wall recording myself for courses. And one of the things that it brings out that's very important is the fact that the students are very involved in their own learning. It's very experiential. And that's what you developed. And that's the beauty of the online environment. You can immerse a student in their own learning, but that's also a challenge because the responsibility for learning online changes hands from the professor to the student. So the student is far more responsible for what they're actively doing.
And especially in this assignment at the beginning of the semester, because we do several over the course of the semester, at the beginning, they struggle with the technology. Because Lehman College has a very strong IT department, I can send them there. But you know, I can give them the directions. You just go here and you click if you have a microphone, because it's embedded in PowerPoint.
That's right.
Is the way we work it.
Well, you know, the fundamentals of the pedagogy are the same. It's the medium that's different.
That's
and Sebastian Thrun, who was the founder of Udacity, and who developed a MOOC, one of the first MOOCs. He's the computer scientist, the professor from Stanford, who led the development of the driverless car. He said a few things. First of all, just as an aside, the MOOC was interesting. They always said it's the democratization of education because it reaches so many thousands of people. Of course, the critics said, well, only, you know, the attrition rate was so high and only, you know, only X thousand completed. But if you think of it as a professor, how many years would it take you to reach those few thousand students anyway? But aside from that, he said something that was very interesting. They what did they film? They filmed theater. That's what they knew. You could see the curtain around the theater, around the stage, until they realized that you can use multiple cameras, you can edit, you can add different sound and background music, and then cinematography was born. I think we're in that transition now for education. People right now, professors tend to, traditional professors, not all, tend to think, okay, I've taught in class, and I'm going to take my traditional class and I'm going to put it online, and that's going to become digital. In fact, it's a different medium altogether. And what I appreciate, Jane, is that you've incorporated so many of what we call the classic 21st century skills combined in your online course, which are the communication, of course, the collaboration with their peer assessment, peer evaluation. I'm sure that you encouraged the critical thinking, a lot of reflection, and certainly a lot of creativity. And those are basic 21st century skills. And if you harness the online environment, if you reshape a syllabus or a course, you can create a very immersive, engaging, active learning experience for a student.
This seems, what you're talking about, Judy and Jane, is a very different experience. Not so much for the student, Because I think the student is already there, but for many of our instructors.
For many of the instructors, yes, but also for the students,
Okay.
because many students who take an online class initially say, oh, it's online, it's going to be easier. In fact, they come back and complain it's harder, because as an online student, they are responsible for continually providing evidence of their learning for the professor and for their classmates.
Right.
So it's a different experience.
Yes, it's certainly a different responsibility. Yes, Martin.
I have a question for Jane, because when you speak for different media, you have to speak differently. Are there particular things with online speech that students have more problems with than and different problems with than they would if they were in the classroom, and how do you deal with that?
In the classroom, very often speaking is voluntary. You ask a question, wait for who raises hands, and call on those people. I have a very large non-native speaker population in my classroom, and some of those students are embarrassed to speak. In this online course, they have no option. And that both forces them to confront that concern and forces them to deal in the real world of, I have to get good at this.
In doing a presentation like the one we just heard, what different kind of advice do you give students than you would if they were giving that same kind of presentation to a live audience in a classroom?
That's a really interesting question. In the assignment part, I do one for them. I have a photograph that I use as my most significant object. It's of a cat of mine who died a few years ago, my baby Angela. And she loved me so purely, so unconditionally. And I talk about that's why it's so meaningful to me. I thought about picking a wedding photo, or I have several other things that matter to me, but this absolute, unconditional love. I tell them, in preparing for it, they have to be prepared for the awkwardness they're going to feel of staring either at the photograph or closing their eyes and simply speaking into a microphone, that some people find it more comfortable if there are people they love around them. Other people want to lock themselves in a closet and be alone. That I look down. It's almost like a dancer, a ballet dancer, picking a spot you just keep spinning to, and you never take your eyes off that spot. If I look at people, I get engaged in the people. If I look around, I'm going to get engaged in something. My focus is to just look down. I tell them that they're not going to like how they sound. Almost no one likes how they sound. And if they want to re-record it, re-record it. Here's the clear button. Here's the clear button. Because I'm a professional writer, I talk a lot about how I don't know any professional writers whose final draft is their first draft. It's draft after draft after draft, and then you're ready to begin thinking about revising, but no, let's do one more draft. It's the same with a verbal presentation. The people who make it look good may just have natural poise or charm. They're naturally articulate. People have different skill sets. But that doesn't mean that you don't learn things and you can't improve. And we're going to improve over the course of the semester.
Excellent.
That's great.
Thank you.
What you said, though, was in addition to that guidance, you obviously set specific and very clear expectations and guidelines of your students. And I also appreciated your comment earlier where you said that you have to move it along. I once read a study that discussed discussion forums online, and they said, you have to give the discussion legs, keep it walking. And you have to set those expectations very clearly online, and that's something that is unique for instructors. They, when you go into class, you can, you have the various verbal, nonverbal cues, and they can ask you questions. Online, you have to be very specific about what you're asking them to do.
I can't agree enough. The more specific you are, the more creative they feel. you set a structure and it sets them free. Otherwise, they just flounder.
That's right.
And they're insecure in the forum until they've had several courses under their belt, I would say.
But online students also, I find they bring stuff to the table in these discussions and in other places. Or I have my media class, we do radio, just like we're doing now. And here we are sitting under a pool of light here at the Black Box. And it's like we're totally engrossed with each other. And I find that happens with the students, is that they get totally, you said you're focusing down, but I think with the focus on the microphone kind of focuses our brain and our ideas and gets us to listen in a way that you don't really do in a classroom. But when you bring it into the radio studio, the students, all of a sudden, they become like really active listeners and
I should
like
mention
detailed talkers.
Excuse me for interrupting.
No, it's all right.
I should mention that in my instructions, I have slides for every assignment, and I do an audio recording for every assignment and chat with myself or say things like, I want you to think about this. Put me on pause for a minute. And then, all right, what did you come up with? So I make it as interactive. I call it in my head faux participation from the French.
But that's very important, because one of the critical elements of an online course is instructor presence. If they feel your presence, they tend to be more actively engaged with the course. They just don't want somebody who's just going to be, anonymous and you have to follow these instructions. They want that. They want to hear your voice, whether it's a narrative in writing or whether it's that introductory video. So I applaud you.
Well, thank you so much.
We have a question from the audience about online classes and the approach to hate speech that happens online. I've never experienced that in an online class in which there's some kind of hateful talk between students. And I wondered if any of you have had that experience and how you would deal with it.
I haven't had that experience, but again, that's part of setting expectations at the outset. And there's something called netiquette, and you really have to netiquette.
Right.
And you really have to explain to students up front and have that, and they sign an agreement, in essence, where they understand that only appropriate speech within the class is acceptable.
Yeah, and I think students know the rules, and I found early on the trick was no anonymity. Mm-hmm. Your name goes on what you're saying.
That's right.
It's connected to what you're saying. Well, if there was anyone who was anonymous, there was this chance that something nasty would happen.
I agree with that. I do that too, and make it clear the expectations. But the one other thing I also do is I make the point that we're here to help one another get better. This is an open, I do it in my in-person classes as well, where what happens in room 310 stays in room 310, because we're just here to help one another get better. Any ideas you have that are supportive and constructive, pass them along. That doesn't mean that the person you're talking to, you're giving this idea to, you don't need to take it, but be receptive to it. And we're just going to be so respectful and supportive of one another. I find it just works beautifully.
That's another goal in online courses, is to foster that online community of learners. That's really important, and that's why we encourage instructors to create collaborative work, collaborative projects. We want the students to be able to work with each other. Even though they're online, there are so many ways that you can do that, and they can learn from each other.
I'll tell you one thing I've tried online that does not work. I tried it twice and said, I'm never doing this again, and that is forming groups. In an in-person classroom, if I have a group project and one person is not being participative, which always happens, and the others get resentful because they're carrying the load, you can maybe manage it. I don't even do it in the classroom anymore. I just don't think it's useful. But online, it becomes so problematic that I quit.
Well, it depends what the project is and how it's designed. There are ways that it can be successful.
I'm sure.
Yeah, no, there are ways that it can be successful. I mean, it depends. It depends what the project is. If each person is responsible, for a piece of something, and if you have a rubric and they can evaluate each other and their participation.
I've tried that.
Okay. Well, it depends.
Can
on the group
you
and the subject.
comment on how durable the interpersonal connections between students are in an online setting as opposed to a different setting? I always enjoy seeing my students sitting together in a cafeteria mid-semester and recognizing that they didn't know each other before.
One of my students, it's going on this semester, I have a question discussion board if you have any questions, and she put up a question, I really want to prove, I needed another set of eyes for proofreading. Would someone read this for me? And she got 3 responses, and so I set up a separate discussion board for you read mine, I'll read yours, is what I called it. And they're still active, the 4 of them, back and forth helping one another. I thought that was great.
When I taught educational psychology online at another university, and one of the projects, one of the assignments was that it had to do with adolescent development, and I paired the students, and I said you had to watch the same film. It was one of two videos. One was The Breakfast Club, and the other was Frontline, PBS show Inside the Teenage Brain. And what I wanted them to do then was to connect with each other, either on a Google Hangout, some web conference, or on a free conference call. Whatever it was, they had to speak with each other, following certain guidelines, interview each other in essence, not to exceed 5-6 minutes, and they were to send me the link. So they were working together. They loved meeting each other. They loved talking to each other, and they sustained that communication throughout. So I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, and I think pairs works. And that kind of collaboration I've had a lot of success with. It's the group thing that just, but I don't think it works in person, as I said.
Well, I've seen it work on the graduate level. I don't know, it could be the sophistication and the maturity.
And lack of motivation. I mean, I deal with, I don't want to say primarily, but probably 60-70% of my students are from a science or technical background, and this is a required course. They volunteer, they sign up for the minor, they're excited about the minor, but this now becomes a required course. And
I had another question from something that you mentioned before. You were talking about different types of speech. I don't know if you had asked if Martin had asked that question. Do you guide them in any way related or specifically identify a TED Talk style of speech, of public speaking?
When I teach any kind of public speaking, and I think I should mention that I'm fairly new as a college professor. I'm in my 3rd year. I come from a corporate training background. I have done presentation skills training for major corporations, American Express, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and so on. And in all of my presentation skills training, we talk about one-on-one, small group, medium-sized group, large group. We talk about how you introduce yourself. You're in charge of how others will perceive you. And so in terms of like a TED Talk, that's a very large group presentation in which you are positioned as an expert. So yes, I think the answer is.
Because it's also specifically developed for the online media.
There's a live audience, and so the best ones I've seen are the ones where you don't have any clue that this is for an online audience.
I would propose, though, that TED Talks is primarily a video presentation, that the live audience is there in order to create a video production. Just like in the Prairie Home Companion, it's primarily a radio program.
Do you think, therefore, that means that it is as if the speaker's aware of the camera? Because I don't get that sense at all.
I think so, yes. Yes.
And they are prepped for that, I believe.
I think the set is set up. Lyle, you had a thought, I saw.
I think they're very aware of the camera, but there's a different kind of performativity because they have a live audience as well. So I think...
yeah, I didn't mean as if they're not aware there are cameras there, but they're not speaking to the camera.
I think they may not be speaking to the camera, but I think the style, the TED Talk style, and I mean, it's very interesting because what have we taken to the classroom? But just analyzing it, that TED Talk style is that's what we see. That the speaker there knows it is TED Talks. TED Talks has a certain patina to it. TED Talks is there on the internet. It is there for a long time or forever. It has all that, that network kind of thing that you don't have if you're just talking to an audience, that it's not being, videotaped or whatever. It's a different kind of thing that's going on, and I think the primary thing is the video thing.
Maybe. I don't know. I think I'm so used to town hall meetings in the corporate world where they're videotaped and archived, and it just feels very similar to me.
I think we have a program.
Well, before we end,
go ahead.
Before we end, I want to thank CLASP for sponsoring this, and I want to thank Alan Winson for putting it together and doing such a fine job as a moderator.
Well, thank you very much. I never introduced myself. I introduced everybody else but myself. Yeah, I'm Alan Winson. I'm here, a teacher here at JJAY College in the communication department and the English department. I'm in both, and have been producing radio568.com here at JJAY for about 2.5 years, and learning how to do it. This was a very advanced version of this program. It didn't work entirely as well as I wanted to, but we're going to get better. We're going to get better, and I thank you all for an enlivening discussion here in the Black Box Theater of JJAY College. In the new building, and I thank CLASP and JJAY and Theater Events for helping us here. Thank you, Sophia Canfield, who was on the mixer over there, and Bill. I don't know Bill's name. He was mixing all the sound for us. Patricia Sokalski is here, and Sean Vey, and other people in the audience. Actually, we got a big crowd that came in while we were while we were talking. There's about 40 or 50 people here. And they've been very, very attentive. Thank you again. If you have anything that you want to say about this program, please tweet us at radio568 JJ, and we will respond, I promise you. Thank you all, and good night from JJAY College.